I got time for us to begin. We're gonna begin with the prayer. We're waiting on Danny to sit down. Our dear Father, we bow our heads before you, and we know that you are the only true and the only living God. And we know that there are people that put their hope and their trust in things that are meaningless. But our Father, we put our hope and our trust in you. And dear Father, we ask that you would hear our prayers. We ask that you would watch over us, that you would bless us, that you would be patient and merciful, that you would never forget that we are flesh and blood, and that, Father, we have weaknesses. And our Father, we ask that you never forget that we have an adversary that seeks to exploit those weaknesses, and that he is so subtle in his temptations. Dear Father, we ask that you please be with each one of us, that you would keep us until that day we can be with you. And our Father, we ask that you please be with our loved ones, that you guard and protect them. Help us to grow spiritually until we become what you want us to be. And our Father, we ask for your forgiveness and for your grace and your mercy. Please love us. And our Father, we pray that we would come to love you in a greater way. And we pray this through Jesus' name. Amen. This is where we got to last week. We got past and obviously what we need to remember is that judges are not supposed to have wrong motives. Their motive for whatever it is that they do ought to be they're trying to do what's right, and they're seeking to do what's right. And so James says when we make decisions about things based on outward appearances, James says we ought not do that. So sometimes what we do, here's the reason that we do this. We do this because we make spiritual decisions using worldly values and worldly standards. And you just can't do that. You have to learn to look through God's eyes. You have to ask yourself, okay, through God's eyes, what would this look like? And I know that's hard for us to do as human beings, but we're told that God does not look on the outward appearance. That was the problem with Samuel when he was supposed to go anoint someone to take Saul's place. Samuel was looking through fleshly eyes and not through God's eyes. And so when the firstborn came out, this has got to be the next king. Well, he wasn't, because what God was doing is he was looking not as man looks, but he was looking through the heart of a person. That's what he was looking for. And so we need to make sure that we don't make decisions based on those outward appearances. Yeah. That's right. What do you mean?
Because he was looking at what she had left.
That's right.
And her giving it all. And, by man's standard, she gave nothing. But by God's standard, she gave more than the richest man gave.
That's right. Because Jesus said she gave all she had. And so he was making a decision based on the heart of a person. And that's what we have to learn to do. If we make decisions based on outward appearances, then then we're doing what the world does. And we got to make sure we don't do that because we're not of the world. Here's mistake number 64. It's faith without works. That's in James chapter 2 and verse 14 or verse 20. Is if someone claims, this is the way that James starts. If someone makes the claim, and he uses the word vego, which means speak, to talk with the focus on the content of what is said. So if this person says this, well, I have faith, but my faith has not changed my life. Well, the question is, then do you have faith? And James is going to deal with that question. So he starts with this. In James chapter 2, verses 15 through 16, he says, if you see a brother or a sister that doesn't have what they need, and you say to them, be ye warmed and be ye filled and go your way, he says, how does the love of God dwell in you? And what he's getting at is that faith without works, what use is that? What value does that have? What is faith supposed to do? It's supposed to change our lives, isn't it? And if it doesn't change our lives, then James says this. He says the purpose of faith is to benefit other people. But faith without benefit, it does nothing. And that's the phrase. That means it is worthless. It does nothing. So even so faith, if it has no works, and this is James's conclusion in verse 17, if it has no effort in carrying out activity, then he says it's nekros. And that means it's dead. It's just as dead as it can be. It's lifeless. It's futile. It's vain. It's useless. Are you willing to recognize, James goes on, that faith without works is dead? And James describes this person who claims that they have faith, but their faith does not change their behavior. And here's the phrase that he uses. He says, they are a foolish human being. He said, that's foolish. Faith is designed to change people. And he uses this.
Just like the Spirit. If the Spirit's left the body, it's dead.
That's right.
If you don't have works with your faith, it's dead.
That's right. And so he says, he uses the phrase, when he says, you foolish person, he uses anthropos, which is the human being. And you know that from anthropology. And he calls them foolish. He says a person with a complete lack of understanding and insight. So he uses this word in describing the faith without works. He says it's useless. And that's argos, which means it accomplishes absolutely nothing. So faith without works, James says, is dead. And again, he uses the word nekros, lifeless. It's dead. It's utterly useless. It's without. There is no relationship to ergon, to the works. And James says there has to be this connection between faith and works. So why do we do that? Well, I suppose faith comes in, and you're going to have to bear with me in this, and what I'm telling you is that faith comes in two forms. One is counterfeit, and one is not. And it doesn't actually, if somebody gives you a counterfeit $100 bill, is it a $100 bill? No, it's counterfeit, isn't it? And so if you take it down to the bank and you say, I think this is counterfeit, and it turns out that it is, then what happened? What happens to you don't have $100. You have nothing. You took a counterfeit and you thought it was real, but when you show it to the bank, it's gone. It's not there. And whatever you thought you had, they're not going to replace it either. They're not going to say, well, here, you take this real one and we'll take the counterfeit. No, that's not how it works. You just lost $100. And so bear with me when I say this, that faith comes in a counterfeit form and a genuine form. And the reason some people choose the counterfeit, that is faith without works, is it really faith? No. But does it look like faith sometimes? Yes. Sometimes it fools other people, doesn't it? And so he says, James is talking about this, and he says, and this is why we sometimes make this mistake, is because we look at the counterfeit and we think it's genuine. Genuine faith is always accompanied with works. It requires change. It requires transformation that becomes reflective of a new person. Genuine faith demands courage. And so why is Rahab used as an example of faith? Because she had the courage that she needed to say, God's people are fixing to destroy Jericho, and I want my family out. So what did she do? She risked her life, didn't she? Now, if they had found out that she'd made this plan with these spies, and they were looking for the spies, and she hid the spies, but if they had found out that she'd hid the spies, what would have happened to her? They would have thrown her off the wall, I guess. I don't know, or hung her, or shot her through with arrows or something, but she would have lost her life. But she had courage, and that courage was a manifestation. It was an outgrowth of her faith. And then Abraham, he made sacrifices. And then when you see trust, then Rahab and Abraham both displayed their faith by their trust in God. So trust is the verification of faith that allows us to let go of self and live obediently to God's will. And anything less than that is a counterfeit faith. So we have to realize that. Otherwise, here's what we do. We commit this sin of faith without works. And we have this, it's a counterfeit that God can see through it. And we need to make sure that we don't commit that sin. Here's number 65. And this is going to get us all, isn't it? There won't be any finger pointing here, will there? And punching and say, boy, he's talking to you. I am talking to me. And I'm talking to you. And we all have this problem. And James, he starts it this way in verse 2. He says, for we all stumble in many ways. And that word stumble is patao, and it means to sin, to err. It's a failure to keep God's law. And he uses that word twice in verse 2. He says the first reference is that it's a generic. We commit a number of sins. And so he's saying there's a lot of different ways that we as human beings can err. And so far, look at this. We're down to 65. And we've got a few more, and then we'll have gone from Genesis all the way to the end of the Bible, looking at specific sins that people commit. And so James says there's a lot of ways that human beings, they err, and they fail to keep God's law. But then in his second reference, he's not talking about the varied ways that people sin. He's talking about the specific way that human beings sin. And it is the sin that we commit with the spoken word, with our mouth. And he uses the metaphor of the tongue, but he's talking about verbal, spoken speech that we as human beings use to communicate with one another. And James says, if anyone does not sin, and he uses the word stumble in what he says, he is a perfect man and able to control himself. I'm just asking for hands in the air. How many of you are, if you're able to control everything you say, raise your hand.
That's why I use the word ill.
Yeah, it's a subjunctive. It means you have the ability to do that, but you don't. Now, if you think about that, that's another, who didn't ever say the wrong thing at the wrong time? Jesus didn't. That's tough, isn't it? And we know that's tough. And that makes us appreciate him even more because he was able to control what he said. But notice, keep in mind the word control. He uses the word perfect, and it's teleos. And you'll find that in the book of James from the beginning to the end. And sometimes if you want to do a word study, then read the book of James and look at the word complete. It's the Greek word teleos. And he's saying, he's not talking about a sinless person, but he is talking about someone who has moral character, someone that has a moral quality. They have a mature spiritual completeness. Now, that makes sense because what is the marker of spiritual quality? From the abundance of the mouth, the heart speaketh. If you want to know someone's character, listen to what they say. Listen to the words that they choose, and that will tell you what's in their heart. Notice the various sins that James indicates can be committed because the tongue is not controlled. When you sin with your verbal speech, what are the sins that come out of that? Well, he uses boasting, oxio, which means self-pride, self-promotion. He uses that in verse 5. In verse 5, he also says random and senseless destruction can be the result of a tongue that's not controlled. And that means that the tongue, and this is what that Greek word means, it means that the tongue is the igniter that leads to destruction. It's kind of like a match, you know, and that's the illustration that James uses. And we don't mean to do that, do we? But sometimes when we don't control what we say, then the words just start coming out. And it may be a single word when you look at somebody and say, stupid. Just that one little word, you know, that has a way of sticking in people's minds.
It's kind of like you said, that match. You can't unburn it.
That's right. Now, if you say it enough, then people start believing it, don't they? And what do? You damage them for the rest of their lives.
Remember, that match burns both ways, so the damage goes to you too.
That's right. But that's what he's talking about. He says unrighteousness, unjust wickedness, and here's the phrase that he used, a world of iniquity in verse 6. So that comes from the tongue. Uncontrolled self-defiling speech. It's spiloo, which means to spot, to stain. And you've had that happen, haven't you? You're sitting there with the ketchup bottle, and all of a sudden, it comes out, and it's all over you. And now on your white shirt, you have a red stain, and you can't get it out. Well, the tongue does that too, in verse 6. But notice, it's uncontrolled It's uncontrolled, self-defiling speech. It's a restless evil, and that means a harsh, uncontrolled bad. And then he describes the sin of the tongue as a poison, aos, which is a deadly secretion. And boy, isn't that graphic? A deadly secretion. Those words that just come out of our mouths, and it's like the secretion is like a snake bite, a venom. And in fact, that's what he uses. He uses the word poison. And in the Psalms, it says the poison of asp is under their tongues. So this is the way he's describing the sins that we can commit. In verses 9 and 10, he said the sin of hypocritical and deliberate deception. Well, that connects the boasting and lying to people. That connects it all together, doesn't it? Can you ever have a relationship with someone that's based on lies? And don't we have a ton of that these days on Facebook? And you look on Facebook, and what does it look like? It looks perfection. But all that's made up, isn't it? So we can do that with our tongues. And James identifies one's speech as a marker or an identifier. He said one's words reveals one's true self. That's what James wants us to understand. What you say is what you remember when we used to say when we were little kids? I'm rubber and you're glue. What you say bounces off me and sticks on you. And what you are is what you say. Something like that. I don't remember it, but I used to use it. That's like telling people, anybody that take a dare and suck an egg. Well, I don't know what that means, but they'll quit daring you if you say that to them. So James says your words are an identifier. They are a marker of who you really are. And we are either controlled by God or by self. And if your speech is controlled by self, then guess what? You're controlled by Satan. James's conclusion regarding the tongue is very simple. He says, my brethren, these things ought not to be this way. And what is he talking about? He's talking about uncontrolled speech that does damage to people. And sometimes it is, you throw it out there and the minute you say it, you wish, I wish I hadn't said that. I wish I hadn't said it that way. I wish I hadn't said it with that tone. And it just popped out. And you feel bad, but guess what? You can't take it back after you said it. You can't unhonk a horn, can you? And you can't take that speech back. And so this is the literal translation of this phrase, not should fellow believers this so be. That's, if you read it in the Greek language, that's the way James said it to the people. And they understood this is wrong. We can't be that way. But the problem is these sins of the tongue that should not be occurring among believers are occurring among believers. Because who's not in control completely? Because God's not in control completely. So, why does this happen? Let me ask you this. How's the best way to fix it? What do you think the best way to fix? You see, think about this. Good speech is generally controlled speech. Why does God not want us to get drunk? Because when you get drunk, what are you out of? You're out of control, aren't you? So he said, don't get drunk, because you're out of control. And you'll do things you won't even know you're doing it. You're out of control. So, what did he say with speech? He said, control your speech. Control what you say. How's the best way to control what we say? You got to think, don't you? Before you say something, think. And I look back on the times where I broke this commandment of God and I sinned with my tongue. It was because of my emotions. And in my emotions, I did not stop and think before I said something. So, here's what you can know about me.
A lack of self-control.
That's right. That's right. If I get mad at you, and I'm really mad, and I do get mad, I won't talk to you. I'll just clam up. You know why? So I won't say the wrong. I've done that enough. I've gotten mad at people and started popping off enough. And I've learned the best way is if I'm really mad to walk away and not say anything.
Anybody's school teacher has been down that road.
And it can happen real quick, can't it?
You have certain people that are going to push every button that you have, and
On purpose.
the next thing you know, you're saying something that you wish you had back.
And you felt good when you said it too. Until later.
I'll give you an example. We had a kid that he pushed my buttons all the time, every day. And I told him, I said, you're just about at the end of your rope. And I didn't know that he had tried to commit suicide before.
Yeah.
And I felt so bad about it.
Yeah. But it's already out there, isn't it?
Yeah, I didn't know, but I
No.
said what I said. And, he didn't think anything about it. He was too busy pushing my buttons.
Yeah.
At the same time, it really, when I said it, after I said it, I really felt bad.
And we can avoid that if we'll think. Controlling one's words is extremely difficult if the emotions are not under control. And we know that, don't we? And so, when you're in that emotional state where your emotions are not as controlled as they ought to be, don't say anything. We often sin with the tongue because we fail to model the behavior of Jesus in response to real life situations that we find ourselves in. You remember when he was verbally abused by others? You remember when he went to trial and they verbally abused him and mocked him and made fun of him, and then they threatened him, and then they attacked him wrongly? Have you ever had that happen to you? Have you ever been verbally abused by others and threatened by others and attacked by others? And boy, that gets your dander up, won't it? And I'll tell you what really gets your dander up. If they attack your family, whew, that'll get you going. And then what are you going to say? Well, Isaiah chapter 53 and verse 7 says, "So he opened not his mouth." He opened not his mouth. And maybe that's what we need to learn. And certainly if we learn that, then we won't commit that particular sin of not controlling our speech. But I will tell you this, it's hard. And I'm not trying to make light of it. I'm saying we all struggle with this. And it's hard. And Satan knows it's hard. So he uses that, not just against that person or this one, the big mouth people. He does it against us constantly. And we have to be careful. And when we realize that we've messed up, then we go to those people that we messed up with and we tell them, "I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have said that." And I can't tell you the number of times that I've had to do that. It's a struggle for all of us. And perhaps we'll get better at it. We try. Hopefully we'll keep trying. And that's not an excuse. I'm not making excuses for us or for me. I'm just saying it's hard. And we need to realize that. All right, Tony. You're on. Is that your way?
Welcome back, everyone, to our evening service. I see visitors. Good to have visitors. Our first song will be number 457. Is it up? It's not up there. How firm a foundation ye saints of the Lord is laid for your faith in His excellent word. What more can we say than to you He has said, you unto Jesus for refuge has fled. Fear not, I am with thee, O be not dismayed. I am thy God, and will still give thee aid. I'll strengthen thee, help thee, and cause thee to stand. Upheld by my gracious omnipotent hand. The soul that on Jesus hath leaned for repose, I will not desert to His foes. That soul, though all hell should endeavor to shake, Next one, number 749.
Father, we thank you for this day, and we're thankful for this opportunity that we have had to come here today and worship you. We know, Heavenly Father, that you are worthy of worship and all the praise that we can give you. We're thankful for this opportunity that we've had to surround your table to remember that great sacrifice that your Son made on that cross so that we can all have forgiveness of our sins. Pray, Heavenly Father, that if we have sin in our lives, that you will forgive us of that sin so that we can all stand just in your sight, and this prayer will be acceptable to you. We're so thankful, Heavenly Father, for all the many blessings that you give us each and every day, and we pray that we will never take those blessings for granted. We pray, Heavenly Father, that you be with the leaders of our nation. As we go through this time where the federal government is shut down, and there are people that are going hungry because they're not getting food to eat. Heavenly Father, this is a trying time for those who are less fortunate. When we know, Heavenly Father, that while Jesus was on the earth, that he fed many people, and part of his ministry was feeding those who were hungry and those who were without. And Heavenly Father, as there are some who don't know where their next meal is going to come from at this point in time, I pray, Heavenly Father, that you will open our eyes and help us to imitate the life of Christ while he was on this earth. Open our eyes to those who are around us and help us to use the blessings that you've given us, and help us to feed those who are hungry. Help us to do this not for our own glory, Heavenly Father, but pray that you will be glorified. We know that we have an opportunity to show that following you is the best way of life, Heavenly Father, and we pray that we will use this opportunity to glorify you, and that if anybody needs anything, that we can be there and show your love to those who are in need. And we pray, on Father, that you will open our eyes again and help us to see the needs of those around us and help us to supply those needs. We pray, only Father, that you be with all those who are sick in the nursing homes and hospitals. Especially ask that you be with Patty Watson and Randy Hutchison and Pam. Be with the others of our number, Heavenly Father, and help them to get the strength that they need to get back to their everyday walks of life. And if it's your will, Heavenly Father, that they be back with us as soon as possible. And pray, Heavenly Father, if it's for those who are on the last days of their lives, we pray that you will make their lives as comfortable as possible so that they will not suffer. And we also ask that you be with the caregivers who are taking care of them. Keep them from getting discouraged and help them to fulfill their role and help them to do so with dignity, and that your name can be glorified. Pray, Father, that you be with all those who are overseas fighting for our freedoms. We know that we have Veterans Day coming up, and it's a chance for us to remember the sacrifices that every soldier made, and we're so thankful for that, Heavenly Father, that we have men and women that are willing to give of their time and to serve us, keep us safe and out of harm's way. Pray, Heavenly Father, that you keep them safe and bring them back to their families safely. Pray that you be with Tim tonight as he brings your message. We pray that he will say something that will touch some lost soul. We pray, Heavenly Father, that you go with each and every one of us as we go through our everyday walks of life and help us to be examples to those around us. And as we study tonight, may we say things, use our tongues to encourage those around us, not to bring people down, not to say things we shouldn't. Pray, Heavenly Father, each and every day that we will grow closer to you and that we will be more of an example of the life that Christ lived on earth so that we can draw others to you. We love you, Heavenly Father, and we pray that we learn to love you more each and every day. And we pray that you come and take us home with you forever. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, John. Our next song is God's Family, and followed by our message. We're part of the family that's been born again. Part of the family who knows no end. For Jesus has saved us and made us His own. Now we're part of the family that's on its way home. Sometimes we laugh together, sometimes we cry, sometimes we share together heartaches and sighs. Sometimes we dream together how it will be when we all get to heaven. God's family. Whenever meets sorrow, we all feel His grief. We pass through the valley. We all feel relief. Together in sunshine, together in rain, together in victory, through His precious name. Sometimes we laugh together, sometimes we cry, sometimes we share together heartaches and sighs. Sometimes we dream together of how it will be when we all get to heaven. God's family. Though some go before us, we'll all meet again, just inside the city. As we enter in, there'll be no more parting. With Jesus we'll be together forever. God's family. Sometimes we laugh together, sometimes we cry, sometimes we share together heartaches and sighs. Sometimes we dream together of how it will be when we all get to heaven. God's family.
You know, I was thinking of ways that God protects us, and sometimes God protects us with songs. Isn't that interesting? That He would protect us with those that write the song, because they write the words down so that we can sing them, and then those that get up and lead singing, and He uses those songs to protect us. And I know there's been times I've been out in the yard singing a song because I was struggling with something. And that song helped me to get through that struggle. And when Tony gets up here and he does this, and just emphatically, this is God. This is what God does for us. That really helps me. And so I don't know if you know this, but God has wanted ads. And the reason he has wanted ads is because he's looking for people. And he's looking for people that will go to work. And I suppose that's why you have wanted ads. And there was a time when the prophet Ezekiel was living on this earth, and God had put out a wanted ad because he was looking for somebody that would work. And you know what's to me some of the saddest words in all of God's word is when he put out his wanted ad and he was looking for somebody that would go to work. God said, "And I found no one." Isn't that a shame? Because what we want is somebody to raise their hand and say, "Here am I, send me." But God said he looked, and this is in Ezekiel chapter 22, that he looked and there was no one that was found. You know what God was looking for? You know what the qualifications were? He was looking for somebody that would bring people to him. Because we need God. And so God, in his ad, said this, here's what I want. I want somebody that will bring others to me. Because their strength is sapped. Because they're weary and they're heavy laden. And I want somebody that will find those weary, heavy laden people and they will bring them to me. I want you to go out and look for those people that are weak, those people that are sin sick. And I want you to bring those people to me. You know what God said about himself? He said, "Behold, the Lord's hand is not so short that it cannot save. Neither is his ear so dull that it cannot hear." God said, "I'm here for you. I want somebody that will go out and bring other people to me." But Ezekiel says he found no one. He found not one. Do you know that God's still searching for those people that will be an influence in this world in whatever way they can and bring people to God? Here's what it would have said in God's wanted ad. God would have said, "I'm searching for a solitary person." Actually, what he's looking for an army. But God is wise enough and smart enough to know that he's not going to find an army. So God says, "I'm just looking for one person. I'm just looking for one solitary person." And you know why God said just one? Because you think about all of the ways in this world and all of the times in history where one person made a huge difference. God would love to have an army. But you know what he'll take? He'll take one man, one woman. Because he knows that one person can make such a huge difference in the history of the world. And in Ezekiel's day, that's what the wanted ad said. I'm looking for one person, one solitary individual. But God could not find anyone. Here's what God's wanted ad said in Ezekiel's day. God said, "I'm looking for one solitary person that will stand. And here's the way it's described. It's described there was a big hole in the wall in the city of Jerusalem. And God said, I want one person to go to that big hole in the wall and stand there and say, nobody's coming through here. To stand up and be counted. And God said, I couldn't find one. I suppose everybody made excuses. Well, how could one person make a difference? Well, normally you couldn't, but if it's one person and God, it makes a huge difference. That's what Jonathan understood when his servant that was with him said, we better not go into that camp. Those Philistines will kill us. And Jonathan said, God is not limited by numbers to rescue people. And so Jonathan, all by himself, marched into that camp. And guess what? It scared everybody so much they thought, well, he's got to have, that's the king's son. He's got to have an army behind him. So they ran as fast as they could. And they were routed by one man and his servant. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said, but even if God does not deliver us, we will not. But even if we will not, we will not bow down to your idol. That was 3 people. Daniel was told not to pray. But even if they told him not to pray, he refused to do what they said. And in Daniel's case, and in the case of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, God found 4 individuals that would stand in the gap and choose to do what's right. Here's what it would say in God's resume, or not in his resume, but in his one ad. God would say, I'm looking for somebody that loves sinners. That loves sinners and their souls so bad that they'll weep and they'll work and they'll be involved in the harvest. And they might sow in tears, but they'll reap with joy. I'm just looking for one person that loves sinners so much that they'd give themselves so that sinners could be saved. I suppose there was a time when God said, that's what I'm looking for. And I know in Ezekiel's day, he said there was not one. But I do know about 400 years from Ezekiel's day, there would be one that God was looking for that loved sinners so much that he would die for them so that they could be saved. And that was the Son of God. And look how that has changed the world. Because somebody in the Garden of Gethsemane said, not my will, but thine be done. I will stand, God, with you. And I will love people. And if I have to stand by myself, and he did, I will still stand with you. Well, God's still looking for those people. And you know what? Let's not be like Ezekiel in his day, where God said, I found not one. Let's be those people that stand with God. Tonight, if you want to do that and you're not his child, you have that opportunity. And tonight, if you want to stand with God and you've been discouraged by Satan and it's caused you to become so downhearted that you haven't been the kind of child that God wants you to be, then let's fix that tonight. If you need to respond, we pray that you'll come while we stand and sing.
Have you been to Jesus? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Are you fully trusting in His grace this hour? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Are you washed in the blood, in the soul cleansing blood? Are your garments spotless? Are they white as snow? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Are you walking daily by the Savior's side? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Do you rest each moment in the crucified? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Are you washed in the blood, in the soul cleansing blood of the Lamb? Are your garments spotless? Are they white as snow? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb? Lay aside the garments that are stained with sin, and be washed in the blood of the Lamb. There's a fountain flowing for the soul unclean. Oh, be washed in the blood of the Lamb. Are you washed in the blood, in the soul cleansing blood of the Lamb? Are your garments spotless? Are they white as snow? Are you washed in the blood of the Lamb?
Jim, you want to tell them about the basket in the back? About for the collection of money for the ones that are on food stamps that are not getting it?
Okay. You want to announce that?
Yes.
Okay. We're going to take up a collection for those people that are on food stamps that may need to buy groceries and stuff, and they can't because they don't have because the government shut down. And if you want to contribute to that, you can put money in the basket in the back.
Good deal. Good deal. Hope we can help. Hope everyone has a good week. So glad you got to come back tonight, this evening, and it's been a great day. You worship the Lord in the morning and at night. That carries us through Wednesday night, or tries. Anyway, our last song, as we bow down, followed by our closing prayer. You are Lord of creation and Lord of my life, Lord of the land and the sea. You were Lord of the heavens before there was time, and Lord of all, Lord, you will be. We bow down and we worship you, Lord, we bow appreciate them.
Dear Heavenly Father, our Lord Almighty, we come to you tonight as a body, thanking you for another beautiful day you blessed us with, an opportunity to come in to this house and worship you in song and prayer. We thank you for all the many blessings you give us, all the life's blessings that we get to enjoy. We thank you for our continued health and our continued safety. But most of all, we thank you for sending your Son, Jesus, to die on that cross for each and every one of our sins. I pray you can forgive us of those sins that we have and remember those against us no longer. We thank you for Brother Tim and the message that he has prepared and delivered to us. I pray that we can take this into our week and apply it and be good examples in this world. Although we fall short, I pray that you can continue to give us patience and kindness in the things that we do. I pray you can be with the ones that are traveling, the ones that may be sick. Please watch over and care for us. We love you. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.